Madame Lapointe? Mr. McKinnon?
What a shame.
What a shame. Cover up!
Mr. Barrett?
Cover up!
No, it's a cover-up.
The committee's already expressed its wishes on March 6th to have this particular hearing on March 19th, so it's as simple as that.
What does this say to Canadians? That they have something to hide. If they didn't have something to hide, we would have had the debate.
They have done everything that they could to block and obstruct the ability of this committee to get to the truth.
So, strong words from the opposition parties after yesterday's emergency debate at the Justice Committee was cut short. Now their next meeting is set for Tuesday. That will happen behind closed doors. It just happens to be Budget Day next Tuesday. So what happens next in the SNC-Lavalin controversy? How will the government use, presumably, the budget to reset the agenda? It's Thursday, and that means it's at issue time. Everyone with me in studio in Toronto, where I am as well. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Andre Demise. Good to see everybody in person. So I want to talk about what happened in that committee this week, but also in terms of how the government may try to seize back the agenda with the budget. What did you make of the Liberal decision to shut down the idea of Jodie Wilson-Raybould, for now anyway, coming back in front of that committee?
Yes, well, I mean, the line was, well, we're not shutting anything down, we're just postponing it to the regularly scheduled date. I guess I'm not clear why March 19th is the magic date, other than it happens to be the day of the budget. So whatever decision they make, whether they call Jodie Wilson-Raybould, whether they call any other witnesses, or whether, as I suspect, they call none of them, it'll get drowned out by the budget coverage, which I suspect was the intent. So no, shutting down that meeting last Wednesday wasn't the end of the world in that, but it certainly presaged, it seems to me, where they're headed.
It wasn't surprising, though, that they didn't want to put her back in that forum, was it? I mean, that they wanted to give her more time in that committee as the only witness. Is that surprising to you? I don't know.
Yes and no. Yes, because pressure and the consensus out there beyond the opposition parties was that she should be allowed to reply to the testimonies that others have given that don't seem to match hers.
Right.
Second, the notion, I'm not insulted by the fact that the meeting will take place on the day of the budget behind closed doors, because that meeting is going to be a meeting about the meeting. But if the intent were to say, yes, let's have her back, that makes very strange strategic sense,
yes,
because the Liberals would then be setting themselves up to overshadow their budget with a second Wilson-Raybould appearance. And if they, for a second, think that the budget will overshadow that, they really are miscalculating. So I'm assuming that they do not want her back, and I'm not sure that they can prevent her from speaking by just saying you can't come to our committee.
Well, so they take issue, the government says they take issue with the notion that they're being perceived as muzzling Jodie Wilson-Raybould, that in fact she could speak anytime she wants to speak. She could speak to me, she could speak to you, she could hold a press conference.
That's entirely possible, but then the moment she does that and steps outside of the Justice Committee to have conversations with the press, I think what will happen to her will be more or less what happened to Selina Caesar-Chavannes, who went to the press, had a conversation about what her conversations were with the Prime Minister, and then she was essentially attacked by Liberal partisans online, social media, etc. So I don't really see how it makes any sense to have her go outside the venue where the questions are supposed to be answered, which is inside of that committee.
I mean, let's look at the larger context. The story broke February the 7th. Ms. Wilson-Raybould spoke to the committee on February 27th. We're now into the next week, into late March, and they're only now debating and considering whether to call her or whether to call other witnesses. This is not how the committee should be proceeding. This is the only forum we have to try to even notionally get to the bottom of this, since we're not apparently going to have a public inquiry. There are serious allegations that top-level officials in the government tried to interfere with a prosecution, a criminal prosecution, on serious charges of fraud and corruption. This is not acceptable. It's fine to say, well, she could speak elsewhere. She could also speak to the committee, and I have yet to hear a good reason why she shouldn't.
Yes. 3 points. One, she did testify about her experience as Attorney General.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that there would be a lot to add to the interference issue from her time after she wasn't Attorney General. The first
Beyond
point.
the cabinet shuffle, which speaks to motivation, I guess.
Yes, but second point, for the Liberals, there would be an advantage in having her in committee, because there are questions that they should be asking. They haven't been, and if they're serious, they would look a lot better asking tough questions than muzzling her or keeping her out of the committee. But I guess the third point is, for herself. There will come a point where she will have to reconcile her desire to remain a part of that team with whatever she wants to say about the person who leads it.
Right.
And so I'm guessing if she does go back and testify, there will be a line at some point that will be crossed where it will become impossible to commend this Prime Minister to voters in 6 months and at the same time to spend more time talking about how terrible he is.
But there's also elementary fairness. Michael Wernick got to testify twice, both before and after. Jerry Butts got to testify after the benefit of hearing her, so he would know where to direct his testimony. They both essentially implied that she was either lying or making things up. So she should be able to say her piece. But secondly, there's all kinds of other people I would like to hear from. Those 2 officials in the Prime Minister's office who apparently were talking to line prosecutors quite improperly, at least according to her testimony. I'd like to hear from them. Maybe it's not true.
Yes. Okay, and I will just for the record point out that I have asked to speak with her on numerous occasions and she has yet to accept. But I mean, she's had invitations, is my point, beyond the committee to say her piece, and maybe that's not the right venue, but there it is. So talk to me about the budget then and how you expect that to factor into all of this, because as we've talked about before, it was this time last year that they were getting over the India trip debacle, had a budget to sort of reset things. I think it appeared to work. Eric Renier's numbers show that things start to track back up after the budget anyway. Do they have to put all their eggs in the basket here in order to try and rebuild the narrative, or is the damage done?
I think the fact that we're even having this conversation shows, to me, it belies a level of cynicism that I think I at least thought in Canadian politics that we were past that. So the idea that we're delaying this second appearance until the day of the budget, whether or not it overshadows, I don't think is really the question. The question is why couldn't we have settled one before we moved on to the other? Why couldn't we have settled this issue? As you pointed out, we've been dealing with this for over a month. This could have been squared away by now in the Justice Committee. So why are we stretching this into the budget period and having a conversation over if we're talking about the future of pharmacare in Canada, we're talking about getting young people into homes and trying to solve the housing crisis in this country. We're conflating that with an issue that was over a month old.
But are we conflating it, or are they trying to say these are the things that matter to us, so we want you to talk about those more?
I think if they wanted to get this squared away by then and then move on to the budget issues and the issues contained therein, they would have done so by now.
I think they think it is squared away. That's what I would argue. Yeah.
I'm not as persuaded as Chantal that Jodie Wilson-Raybould would drown out the budget versus the other way around. I think the message the government will try to say is the opposition wants to talk scandal. We're talking about the real concerns of men and women in Canada. They've got several $1 billion in extra revenues, it looks like, because they lowballed the revenue numbers as usual. I suspect there'll be a lot of goodies in this budget, and we shall see. Maybe Chantal's right, but we shall see which takes precedence in news coverage.
The budget was always going to have lots of goodies in it because it's a pre-election budget. And it is fair game for the government to remind voters of other issues than Jodie Wilson-Raybould and SNC-Lavalin, because when they make that choice in October, it's going to be on more than that.
So then we get to repeat at a national level what's already happened in Ontario, is that the government tries to paper over a scandal by dropping a whole bunch of goodies in the government.
I think
the opposition seizes on that, and then we spend 4 years undoing what was done.
Chantal, finish your point.
I don't think the government should forego presenting a budget.
Well, I'm not saying that.
Hang on, let Chantal finish.
If that's where we're going, I don't agree with that.
I'm not by any stretch saying that.
So the sheer presentation of a budget does not paper over. You're actually re-arguing my point. I believe that if she showed up the day after the budget would be forgotten and dropped from the headlines much more quickly than if she does not.
But do they need it more than they would have anyway, given it's a pre-electoral budget? I guess that's my question.
I've seen governments who were going into elections bring goodie budgets time and again, and in the end, if you're going to be re-elected, it usually is based on the character of the Prime Minister and not on some goodie budget that came 6 months before. Because remember those checks that Stephen Harper sent the entire summer. Philippe Couillard had nothing but goodies this time last year, and look where he is today, or where is he, by the way? Kathleen Wynne, how much papering over did she do? I don't know.
Well, there was no papering over done, but what's happening on Ontario is that some of the great items that were included in the last budget in the Wynne government are now being undone by the Ford government, which is likely what will happen if the Liberals are defeated this year.
It will be interesting to see how the opposition plays the budget. I'm not sure that you can credibly have business as usual when the government is preventing key witnesses who are accused of having tampered with the prosecution to just go ahead with the budget and pretend everything's normal. So it will be interesting to see. They've promised to use, quote unquote, every toolkit the opposition has at their disposal. We shall see what
Yeah,
they
but
do.
to Chantal's point, what do you expect them to do? Not table the budget? Not pretend
I'm not saying
that they're governing, that they shouldn't be governing?
The government will do what the government will do. I think the opposition, though, has an opportunity to make the point that this is not business as usual. We are not going to play along and just pretend that this issue is just a sidelight.
Sure.
It's an incredibly important issue if the government of the day is going to be monkeying around with a criminal prosecution.
Last word to you.
I guess if you're asking, can Bill Morneau save the government from and reverse the polls? I don't think so. I think by now the issue is squarely onto the Prime Minister, and that's why the narrative of the SNC-Lavalin endures. It's not because everyone wants to hear everyone. I know Andrew does, but it's because it has cast doubts as to the character of the Prime Minister as he is about to ask for another mandate.
Right, but can the budget, in terms of defining him and his leadership, can it do that? Forget Bill Morneau. We've all agreed what his limitations are, but can he do that himself?
The only budget that I've ever seen that has done that was the 95 Paul Martin budget, because it was a watershed budget, not a goody pre-election budget, and I don't think that budget is going to be a structurally watershed budget.
The combination of throwing goodies at people while stonewalling on this issue is not a good one.
I think what it really comes down to is this, what kind of society do we live in, and what kind do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a society where if you have enough wealth and enough connections to the government, you can essentially side-skirt the law? Or do we agree that we are all, are we all subject to the law as it is written? And I don't think that, regardless budget or not, we can really get away from that conversation.
Okay, gotta leave it there. Thanks, everybody. Before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content this week. Maybe you guys don't know this yet, but we're going to talk about the NDP's strategy for Quebec. You probably do. Ahead of the election, look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.